The rain fell mercilessly on Maple Avenue, pelting the manicured lawns of elegant suburban homes that stood like silent witnesses. Sarah Bennett, 48, remained motionless on the sidewalk, rainwater streaming down her face, mixing with what might have been tears. Her hands rested protectively on the shoulders of twins Emma and Oliver, both 10 years old, their small faces frozen in confusion and grief. Moving men shuttled cardboard boxes from the Victorian-style house to a waiting truck. The front door was held open by an elegant woman in her 60s, dressed in expensive clothes, seemingly impervious to the downpour. Her face wore the cold determination of someone accustomed to having her decisions obeyed without question. Have you ever felt your entire world collapse in a single moment? The ground beneath your feet suddenly gone? Where are you listening from today? 6 weeks. That's how long it had taken Victoria Harrison to evict her son's widow and grandchildren after David's funeral. 6 weeks of grief, still raw and bleeding, before Sarah found herself standing in the rain, watching strangers pack away the remnants of the life she had built with her husband. "You never truly belonged here anyway," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the lawn with practiced precision. Each word landed like a stone. Sarah tightened her grip on her children's shoulders. Emma trembled beneath her touch, while Oliver stood rigid, his small jaw clenched in a manner so reminiscent of his father that Sarah's heart contracted painfully in her chest. "This house belongs to the Harrison Family Trust," Victoria continued, approaching them with measured steps. "You lived here through our generosity, which, unfortunately, has reached its limit." 15 years earlier, Sarah had been a history teacher with a passion for Renaissance art when she met David Harrison at the Metropolitan Museum. He stood before a lesser-known Caravaggio, sketching rapidly in a worn notebook, his concentration so complete he didn't notice her watching. When he finally looked up, his green eyes held a warmth that made her forget the clever opening line she'd prepared. "You see it too, don't you?" he'd asked, the light fighting against the darkness. David came from money. Old money that had shaped the city's skyline for generations. The Harrison Real Estate Group owned half the commercial properties downtown. Sarah came from teachers and nurses, people who measured wealth in kindness rather than square footage. Victoria and Richard Harrison made their displeasure known from their first meeting, treating Sarah with the polite disdain reserved for temporary inconveniences. "Teaching is admirable," Victoria had said over dinner in their mansion. The pause before admirable spoke volumes. They married anyway. David chose Sarah over his parents' approval, and for years they lived happily in the house on Maple Avenue. Emma and Oliver arrived, bringing with them the chaotic joy of childhood. David painted while Sarah taught, and they built a life rich in love if modest in luxury. When David was diagnosed with brain cancer at 45, the tumor was already aggressive. "Promise me something," he had whispered one night, his once strong hand frail against her cheek. "Promise you'll remember that you're enough, exactly as you are. Promise you'll teach our children that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account." Sarah had promised, though she hadn't understood the urgency behind his words. Now, standing in the rain with nowhere to go, that promise felt like her only possession. Victoria's voice cut through her memories. "We've made arrangements for Emma and Oliver to stay with us at the estate. You'll have time to figure out your situation." "No." The word erupted from Sarah with unexpected force. "We stay together. That's not negotiable." "Don't be ridiculous, Sarah," Victoria sighed. "You can't possibly provide for them on a teacher's salary. Think about what's best for the children." "I am what's best for them," Sarah replied, her voice steadying. "I'm their mother." "For now," Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Our attorneys may have different thoughts on that matter." Before Sarah could respond, a taxi pulled up to the curb. An elderly Asian woman emerged, her silver hair cut in a practical bob, her movements purposeful despite her 70 years. "Perfect timing as always, Eleanor," Sarah said, relief washing through her. Professor Eleanor Chen had been Sarah's mentor at the university and had become a surrogate mother over the years. She had been the only person besides David who truly believed Sarah belonged in academic circles dominated by pedigree. "The moving truck is following my instructions," Eleanor said, ignoring Victoria completely. I've made arrangements. As they prepared to leave, Sarah noticed Oliver slip back toward the house. He returned moments later, clutching a worn leather journal. Dad's notebook, he whispered. I couldn't leave it. In the taxi, Eleanor handed Sarah a small envelope. Inside was a key and an address in the Oakwood neighborhood. David came to see me 2 months before he passed, Eleanor explained. He asked me to give you this when certain circumstances arose. He knew this would happen? Sarah's voice cracked. He knew his parents, Eleanor replied simply. And he knew you'd need a contingency plan. Emma, who had been silent since they left the house, suddenly spoke. Did Daddy leave us because of something I did? Sarah gathered her daughter close, inhaling the scent of strawberry shampoo in childhood. No, sweetheart. Your father loved us more than anything in the world. Sometimes people we love have to leave, even when they want to stay more than anything. As the taxi wound through the city toward an uncertain future, Sarah wondered if she had enough strength left to rebuild from nothing. David had believed she did. She would have to trust him one last time. The house on Oakwood Street stood before them like a question mark. Weathered siding, a sagging porch, and windows that had seen decades of seasons changing. It wasn't condemned, but it had clearly been unloved for years. It's got good bones, Eleanor said optimistically, using her cane to push aside weeds growing through cracks in the walkway. Inside, dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through dirty windows. The rooms were empty except for a few pieces of basic furniture, beds, a table, chairs, that Eleanor had arranged to be delivered. It's not much, Sarah admitted, watching her children explore the creaking floors and peeling wallpaper. It's ours, Oliver said, with the pragmatism of a child who had already learned that life could change in an instant. We can fix it. That night, after tucking the twins into beds with new sheets that couldn't disguise the age of the mattresses beneath, Sarah sat alone in the kitchen. David's journal lay before her, unopened. She traced the worn leather cover, remembering how he'd carried it everywhere, jotting down observations and sketching scenes that caught his eye. Finally, she opened it, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside, among sketches and notes about his art, she found entries about his illness, about his parents, and about a mysterious grandmother's legacy he mentioned repeatedly. One passage made her pause. Sarah is stronger than she knows. She'll face this test and emerge not just intact but magnificent. I only wish I could be there to see it. What test had he anticipated? And what did he mean about his grandmother's legacy? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. On the porch stood an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. Margaret Wilson, she introduced herself. I live 3 houses down. Thought you might need this more than me tonight. She held out a bottle of wine and a casserole dish. That's incredibly kind, but I knew David when he was a boy, Margaret continued, stepping past Sarah into the house with the confidence of someone who had spent decades in classrooms maintaining order. I was his 3rd-grade teacher before I retired. He used to stay after school to draw. Had the most extraordinary eye for color. Sarah felt the first genuine smile in weeks cross her face. Please, come in. As they shared the casserole and wine, Margaret filled in the gaps of David's childhood, stories Sarah had never heard from him or his parents. This neighborhood meant something to David, Margaret explained. His grandmother Elizabeth lived here before the Harrisons moved to their mansion. He spent summers with her, learning to paint in that very backyard. When Margaret left, Sarah returned to the journal with new understanding. The grandmother's legacy wasn't just about memories. It was about this place, this neighborhood, these connections that the Harrisons had tried to sever. Do you think Sarah should fight the Harrisons for her children's future, or try to find common ground? Share your thoughts in the comments below. 3 months into their new life, Sarah discovered that poverty wasn't about not having money so much as the constant mental mathematics of survival. She could recite the exact cost of groceries at 3 different stores, knew which day the bakery marked down bread, and had memorized the bus schedule that would get her between home, school, and her 2 part-time jobs with minimal transfers. Mornings began at 5:30 a.m. preparing for her classes at Jefferson High School. Afternoons found her cataloging artifacts at the city museum. Evenings were spent tutoring wealthy students in their homes, sitting at kitchen islands that cost more than her monthly rent. Oliver and Emma adapted with the resilience that children possess but shouldn't need to use. They enrolled at Oakwood Elementary, a school with outdated textbooks but dedicated teachers. Oliver appointed himself man of the house, fixing leaky faucets with YouTube tutorials. Emma retreated into her art, filling sketchbooks with drawings that showed a talent inherited from her father. The neighborhood embraced them with unexpected warmth. Gabriel Rodriguez, a contractor who lived 2 doors down, appeared one Saturday with his tools and teenage son Miguel to repair the porch steps. "No one's keeping score, Professor," he said, when Sarah protested she couldn't pay. "My roof leaked for 2 winters before I could afford to fix it. We take care of each other here." Gabriel had been in Oakwood his entire life, raised by parents who had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but determination. "This neighborhood has a way of teaching you what real wealth looks like," he told Sarah as they worked together repainting her kitchen. "And it isn't the kind you can deposit in a bank." Mrs. Cooper at the corner store extended credit when Sarah's paycheck was delayed. Margaret organized a neighborhood fix-up day before winter, and a dozen people showed up to insulate windows and repair the heating system. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah experienced community not as an abstract concept she taught about, but as a living, breathing entity that held people together when everything else fell apart. Then came the day that changed everything. Sarah was grading papers at the kitchen table when the doorbell rang. On her porch stood Victoria Harrison, immaculately dressed, her expression revealing nothing. "May I come in?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. Inside, Victoria surveyed the modest living room with its mismatched furniture and freshly painted walls. "I see you've been settling in. What do you want, Victoria?" "I've been speaking with Principal Turner at Oakwood Elementary," Victoria said, examining a finger for non-existent dust. Apparently, Emma and Oliver are quite exceptional. Their test scores are remarkably high despite the school's limitations. Sarah tensed. The school has excellent teachers who care about their students. "Nevertheless, Richard and I feel the children deserve better opportunities. Westfield Academy has agreed to offer them full scholarships beginning next semester." "That's very generous," Sarah said carefully. "But the children are happy where they are." Victoria's composure slipped slightly. "Don't be obtuse, Sarah. These opportunities will shape their entire futures. Surely you don't want your pride to limit their potential." Before Sarah could respond, the front door opened, and the twins returned from school with Margaret, who had begun walking them home each day. Victoria's eyes narrowed at the sight of her grandchildren holding hands with the elderly teacher. "Emma, Oliver," she said, her voice softening artificially, "I've missed you terribly." The children froze, looking to Sarah for guidance. "Your grandmother was just leaving," Sarah said firmly. "Actually," Victoria continued, "I came to invite you all to dinner at the estate this Sunday. Your grandfather misses you, and your rooms are just as you left them." Oliver stepped forward. His young face set with determination that belied his 10 years. "We don't want to come for dinner, Grandmother. We like our home here." Victoria's composure faltered, genuine hurt flashing across her features before the polished facade returned. "Darling, surely you can't prefer this situation to the comfort we can provide." "Dad is what's best for us," Emma said softly, surprising everyone with her direct response. "He told me that when he was sick. He said Mom is teaching us important things." "Like what, Precious?" Victoria's tone was indulgent, as if humoring a child's fantasy. "Like how to be brave when things are hard," Emma replied, "and how family sticks together no matter what." Victoria's gaze shifted to Sarah with newfound calculation. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "Our attorneys will be in touch regarding visitation arrangements." After she left, Sarah found her hands trembling. The Harrisons had resources, connections, and a lifetime of getting their way. If they decided to pursue legal action, the battle would be exhausting and expensive, resources Sarah simply didn't have. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah found herself drawn again to David's journal. Among the final entries was a sealed envelope marked simply, "For when you must choose." Inside was a letter in David's handwriting, steadier than his final journal entries. This had been written earlier, when his mind was clear and his hand still strong. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, you're facing a difficult decision about our children's future. I can't know exactly what the choice entails, but I know my parents well enough to predict they'll offer something that seems reasonable, practical, advantageous, with strings attached that may not be immediately visible. Here is what I want for Emma and Oliver. I want them to grow up knowing their value isn't determined by their bank account or social connections. I want them to recognize genuine kindness and distinguish it from manipulation. I want them to understand that integrity sometimes requires sacrificing convenience or advantage. These lessons rarely come from prestigious institutions or exclusive social circles. They come from watching the adults they love make difficult choices based on principle rather than convenience. Trust yourself, Sarah. You know our children. You know what matters most. Remember what you said to me when my parents offered you that position at the gallery? Some costs don't appear on the balance sheet. You were right then. I suspect you're right now, too." With all my love, Sarah folded the letter carefully, her resolve strengthening. Whatever the Harrisons might throw at her, she would face it with the certainty that David had trusted her judgment above all others. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between security and principle? Share your experience in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in Sarah's journey. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon as Sarah was preparing dinner. The number was unfamiliar, but something, perhaps intuition, perhaps fatigue with screening calls, made her answer. "Mrs. Bennett? This is Catherine Morgan from Westbrook Legal Associates. I represent the Reynolds Trust, and I've been trying to reach you regarding an urgent matter concerning your late husband." The law offices of Westbrook Legal occupied the middle floors of a downtown high-rise, neither as opulent as the top-floor firms serving the city's elite, nor as utilitarian as the storefront practices catering to working-class clients. Catherine Morgan was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with an efficient manner that suggested competence rather than warmth. She led Sarah to a conference room where several folders were arranged neatly on the polished table. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Bennett. I represent the Reynolds Trust, a private foundation established by your husband's maternal grandmother, Elizabeth Reynolds. Are you familiar with Mrs. Reynolds?" David spoke of her often, but she passed away before we met. Catherine nodded, opening the top folder. Mrs. Reynolds established the trust in 1985 with explicit instructions regarding its management and distribution. The principle was to remain untouched until certain conditions were met. What conditions? David was named the primary beneficiary upon reaching the age of 30, provided he demonstrated what Mrs. Reynolds termed a life of purpose and compassion. According to the trustee's evaluation, he met those conditions. The trust, valued at approximately $195 million, was placed under his sole control 3 years ago. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. That's impossible. David never mentioned anything about that kind of money. We lived on my teaching salary and his gallery sales. We budgeted for vacations, saved for the children's education. According to our records, Catherine continued, David established the Bennett Foundation immediately after gaining control of the trust. He directed that the funds be used primarily for philanthropic purposes, with specific provisions for educational initiatives, community development, and healthcare access for underserved populations. Sarah struggled to reconcile this information with the life they had lived together. David, secretly controlling a fortune while they clipped coupons and bought clothes on sale. David, establishing a foundation she'd never heard of, making decisions about millions of dollars without ever mentioning it. Why wouldn't he tell me? Catherine consulted another document. That's where matters become more personal, Mrs. Bennett. David left specific instructions regarding disclosure of the foundation and its assets. According to his directives, you were to be informed of its existence exactly 1 year after his death, provided certain conditions were met. What conditions? Separation from the Harrison family's influence, establishment of an independent household, and demonstration of, I'm quoting directly from his instructions, continued commitment to the values we shared throughout our marriage, particularly regarding the children's upbringing. The realization dawned slowly, then all at once. David had anticipated everything: his parents' attempt to control the children, Sarah's displacement from their home, the financial struggles that would follow. He had orchestrated a test, a proving ground for the principles they had built their marriage upon. He knew this would happen, Sarah whispered. He knew his parents would try to take the children, that they'd use money as leverage. Catherine nodded. Based on my conversations with David during the establishment of the foundation, yes, he was concerned that his parents' wealth would influence the children's values if they were raised in the Harrison household. He was equally concerned that you might compromise your principles if offered financial security in exchange for concessions regarding their upbringing. Anger flared briefly in Sarah's chest. Anger that David had kept such secrets, that he had orchestrated this elaborate test without her knowledge or consent. But the anger faded as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a deeper understanding of the man she had loved. David, who had grown up witnessing the corrosive effects of unearned wealth and privilege. David, who had chosen a life of purpose and meaning over one of luxury and ease. David, who had wanted to ensure that their children would inherit values, not just money. What happens now? Sarah asked. Catherine opened another folder. As the surviving parent and legal guardian of Emma and Oliver, you become the primary trustee of the Bennett Foundation. David specified that the children would become co-trustees upon reaching the age of 21, assuming they demonstrate the same values the foundation was established to promote. The magnitude of the responsibility was overwhelming. I don't know anything about running a foundation. I'm a history teacher, not a financial manager. The foundation has a professional management team in place, with clear guidelines established by David. Your role would be oversight and direction, ensuring the foundation's activities align with its stated mission. Additionally, there are provisions for your family's financial security, a modest but comfortable stipend to cover living expenses, educational costs for the children, and healthcare needs. And the Harrisons, do they know about this? Catherine's expression turned carefully neutral. The Harrisons are aware of the Reynolds Trust. They were explicitly excluded from any control over its assets by the terms of Mrs. Reynolds' will. However, they are not aware of David's specific directives regarding the Bennett Foundation or the timing of your appointment as trustee. As Sarah left the law office, the city streets seemed altered somehow, as if she were seeing them through a different lens. The weight of David's revelation pressed against her chest, a complex mixture of gratitude, betrayal, and disbelief. She had lived the past year in a state of near-constant financial anxiety, working 3 jobs to keep their heads above water while a fortune waited in trust, its revelation dependent on her adherence to principles she would have maintained regardless. That evening, Richard Harrison's sleek black car appeared outside the house on Oakwood Street. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as he sat there for several minutes before finally emerging, his tall frame incongruous on the modest street. "We need to talk, Sarah," he said when she opened the door. "About the Reynolds Trust, about the children's future, about how we move forward from here." Sarah thought of David's letter, of the community that had embraced them, of Emma and Oliver's resilience in the face of loss. With a steadying breath, she invited Richard inside to face whatever came next. Victoria and Richard Harrison sat stiffly on Sarah's living room sofa, looking out of place amid the modest furnishings. The twins had been sent to Margaret's house for cookies and stories, leaving the adults to their negotiation. "We've had our attorneys review the Reynolds Trust documents," Richard began without preamble. "It appears David made his wishes quite clear regarding the foundation's management." "Yes, he did," Sarah agreed. "Nevertheless," Victoria interjected, "we believe a compromise would benefit everyone, particularly the children. We propose that the Bennett Foundation remains under your trusteeship as David intended. In exchange, Emma and Oliver attend Westfield Academy, funded by the foundation, not by us, while continuing to live with you." The offer was reasonable on its surface, more reasonable than Sarah had expected. Yet something in Victoria's too careful tone raised her suspicions. "And if I decline?" Richard cleared his throat. "Then we would be forced to proceed with a formal petition for grandparent visitation rights. Our attorneys believe we have a compelling case given the children's long-term financial interests and family history. I need to discuss this with Emma and Oliver, Sarah said. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. They're children, Sarah. They're not equipped to make decisions of this magnitude. They're people, Sarah replied firmly. People whose lives were upended when they lost their father. People who deserve some agency in what happens to them next. To Sarah's surprise, Victoria's composure suddenly cracked. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, Sarah saw past the perfectly maintained facade to the grief underneath. I don't know how to reach them, Victoria admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to be a grandmother instead of a director on a board. I miss him so much, Sarah. The children are all we have left of David. The raw honesty of the admission stunned Sarah into silence. In all their years of strained interaction, Victoria had never revealed such vulnerability. I know you loved him, Sarah said gently. We all did, in our different ways. Victoria looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I don't know how to love without controlling. It's how I was raised, how I've always been. My own mother measured affection in achievements, in proper behavior, in maintaining appearances. I never learned another way. In that moment, Sarah glimpsed the woman beneath the polished exterior, someone who had learned to equate love with management, who expressed care through control because she knew no other way. Perhaps, Sarah suggested, we can find a middle path. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in the elegant ballroom of the Harrison estate, watching Emma and Oliver move confidently among the city's elite at the annual Harrison Foundation Charity Gala. The invitation had come as a surprise, an olive branch from Victoria following their conversation. Sarah had accepted with trepidation, wondering if she was compromising the very principles David had valued. But he had also believed in building bridges rather than walls, in finding common ground where possible. You look lovely tonight, Richard said, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. The children seemed to be enjoying themselves. Emma was showing her artwork to a renowned gallery owner, while Oliver was engaged in animated conversation with the Dean of Sciences from the local university. They're adaptable, Sarah replied, but they're also very clear about what they want. They've chosen to stay at Oakwood Elementary with the friends they've made. I hope you and Victoria can respect that. Richard nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about our earlier disagreements. Perhaps I was too quick to assume that wealth and social position were the only advantages worth securing for the children. He paused, watching Oliver explain something with enthusiastic hand gestures. David was the same way at that age, passionate about everything that interested him. We tried to channel that passion into appropriate directions, business, finance, connections that would serve him well. I sometimes wonder if we missed something essential about who he really was. Before Sarah could respond, Victoria appeared, unusually hesitant. There's something I'd like to show you all, she said. In the library. The Harrison Library had been transformed into a gallery space. Displayed with museum-quality lighting were dozens of David's works, from childhood sketches to his final paintings. Each piece was accompanied by a small plaque providing context and commentary. We've been collecting David's art since he was a child, Victoria explained, as Emma and Oliver moved through the exhibition in stunned silence. After his passing, we discovered additional pieces in his studio at the estate, works he had created during his visits home but left behind. Sarah felt equally overwhelmed, recognizing familiar pieces alongside works she had never seen. They reached a section dedicated to David's final works, paintings created during his illness. Among them was a triptych titled Legacy. 3 panels depicting the same landscape from different perspectives. The first showing the view from the Harrison estate, grand and formal. The second, capturing their old home on Maple Avenue. The third, revealing a scene of a modest house on a tree-lined street surrounded by a vibrant community garden. He painted this just weeks before he passed, Richard said quietly. I didn't understand it at the time. Now I think perhaps he was showing us something important. Different versions of home, different kinds of legacy. It's Oakwood Street, Sarah realized with sudden clarity. The community garden we started last month looks almost exactly like this. He saw it before it existed, Victoria murmured. He envisioned the home you would create together, even when he knew he wouldn't be there to share it. The realization was both heartbreaking and profoundly comforting. David had somehow foreseen not just the challenges they would face after his death, but the new life they would eventually build. The Harrison Foundation would like to establish a permanent scholarship in David's name for young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, Victoria said. We thought perhaps the Bennett Foundation might consider a matching grant, our two families working together to continue David's legacy in a meaningful way. The offer represented more than a philanthropic collaboration. It was an acknowledgement that David's legacy belonged to both families, that his values could be honored through cooperation rather than conflict. I think David would like that very much, Sarah agreed. 2 years after moving to Oakwood Street, the Bennett family gathered in their backyard for a celebration. The once neglected house now stood transformed, not into a showplace of wealth or status, but into a warm, welcoming home that reflected the journey its inhabitants had traveled together. The garden bloomed with vegetables and flowers, many transplanted from David's original garden at the Harrison estate. The newly built studio at the back of the property housed Emma's growing collection of artwork, alongside preserved pieces of David's that Victoria had gifted to the children. Friends and neighbors filled the yard, Margaret directing food preparation with military precision, Gabriel Rodriguez and his family setting up tables and chairs, Gabriel now serving as a paid instructor at the community center, teaching construction skills to local youth. Rebecca Turner arrived with a group of teachers from Oakwood Elementary, where Emma and Oliver continued to thrive academically and socially. Emma, now 12, had blossomed into a confident young artist whose work had already been featured in local exhibitions. Oliver had developed into a thoughtful, analytical child with a passion for architecture and mathematics that sometimes reminded Sarah so much of David it took her breath away. Even the Harrisons were present. Richard somewhat stiff, but making visible efforts to engage with the other guests, Victoria more relaxed than Sarah had ever seen her, helping Emma arrange her artwork for display. Victoria's transformation had been the most surprising. The woman who once measured worth in dollars and social status had, over 2 years of regular but careful interaction with her grandchildren, slowly learned a different way of connecting. There had been missteps and tense moments, but also genuine growth. She still wore her designer clothes to Oakwood, but now she paired them with gardening gloves when helping Emma plant flowers. The occasion was the official launch of the David Bennett Community Arts Center, a joint project of the Bennett Foundation and the Harrison Foundation. Housed in a renovated building just blocks from Oakwood Elementary, the center would provide arts education, exhibition space for emerging artists, and community gathering areas, all free of charge to neighborhood residents. As Sarah watched her children move confidently among the guests, Oliver explaining the center's architecture to an interested neighbor, Emma proudly showing Victoria her latest paintings, she felt David's presence more strongly than she had since his death. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a continuing influence, a set of values and visions made manifest through the lives they were building. Catherine Morgan approached, a rare smile softening her typically professional demeanor. David would be proud of what you've accomplished, Mrs. Bennett. Not just the foundation or the arts center, but the family you've nurtured through extraordinary circumstances. Sarah nodded, watching as Richard Harrison awkwardly but sincerely complimented Margaret on her garden design, a small but significant bridging of worlds that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. We're still figuring it out day by day, Sarah said. The Harrisons and I will never agree completely on parenting philosophy or values, but we found a way to give Emma and Oliver the best of both worlds. Financial security and social connection from their grandparents, grounding in community and service from our life here. As the celebration continued into evening, lanterns illuminating the yard with warm golden light, Sarah found herself on the porch steps with Emma and Oliver, taking a momentary break from the gathering. "Do you think Dad knew we'd end up here?" Emma asked, leaning comfortably against Sarah's side. "In this house, with these people?" Sarah thought about David's final painting, the vision of Oakwood Street he had somehow foreseen. She thought about the trust he had established, the letter he had written, the path he had helped create, even knowing he wouldn't walk it with them. "I think he hoped we would find our way to something like this," she replied. "Not the exact circumstances, perhaps, but the essentials. A home built on love rather than luxury. a community based on genuine connection, a life rich in meaning and purpose. Oliver, ever practical, considered this thoughtfully. So the money was just to make sure we could choose our own path, not to make us rich, but to give us freedom? Exactly, Sarah smiled, pulling him close. Your father understood something important. That true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the quality of our connections, the depth of our experiences, and the impact of our choices. As they rejoined the celebration, Sarah carried the warm certainty that David would indeed be proud, not of the foundation's assets or the art center's facilities, but of the family that had emerged from crisis, stronger and more resilient, guided by his vision but finding their own way forward. Together, they had discovered what David had known all along, that the most valuable inheritance wasn't the one measured in millions, but the legacy of love, courage, and purpose that no amount of money could buy or replace. Sometimes our greatest losses open pathways to treasures we never knew existed. Have you experienced something similar in your life? Share your story in the comments below.